What I'm talking about today is actually something that we talked about on the last version of this Unit Ventures presentation or platform a couple of weeks ago. Something that we're really passionate about, and it's sort of a new theme as we go through running venture funds, and as we go through sort of running special purpose capital, and now as we're moving a little bit more into operating some companies, our global mandate for what we're trying to do as an entity at Bicameral Ventures has really expanded and expanded and expanded, and we keep trying to find bigger and bigger and bigger ways to contextualize with the various initiatives that we're looking at. And really where we're getting to is trying to find this unified theory of everything, and this is our latest attempt at it. So without further ado, I'll dive into the lizard and the machine: calculable human integrity in a machine speed world. So the real danger is that humanity has Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. Edward O. Wilson. And this is a super interesting way to contextualize where we are in our world and in our situation today. We have these lizard brains, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. I'm sure everybody's heard that term before for how humans sort of process the world. But it imbued into these these medieval institutions that are really set up in the mid 1200s, 1300s of how we organize our capital, how we organize our businesses, how we organize our social and economic structures. And then within these frameworks, we have this godlike technology that allows us to execute in insane ways that were never ever forecast in the way we set up both ourselves and also the way we set up our institutions. And so we've ended up with all of these different forces sort of running into each other, and with some really, really weird and obviously some unpleasant outcomes a lot of the time. So where we think and where we're looking at is this idea of, you're familiar with the lizard brain, where it's kind of what's responsible for our silliest impulses, our quest for short-term gratification, our aggressiveness, our short-term nature, our pain avoidance, and really a lot of the ways that we survived back historically in historical times. Now, what's amazing about humans is that we actually have this ability to, and we've spent the last thousands of years coming up with religion and morality systems and laws and this concept of right and wrong in order to override this lizard brain and come up with a more human, more collaborative, more long-term thinking. We can be social wizards, we can be caring and kind, and all of the things that are sort of overriding our traditional lizard brains. And it's taken us a long time to be able to figure out what those things are that we're trying to do, and the mechanisms in place to be able to sort of subvert our initial impulses and turn into this human brain that makes us the dominant species on Earth. But all of those, whatever mode we're in, whether it's lizard mode or human mode, we're all using the same machinery to execute it. So nerves, synapses, our muscles, our bodies, and all those things happen behind the scenes without even thinking about it. So we've all had situations where something's happened, we've lashed out and said, shit, I don't know why I did that. But we've also all had situations where artists call it being in the flow, athletes call it being in the zone. A Buddhist might call it being in a state of Zen, where your brain is operating in this human mode and your body is actually executing on it, or the machinery that goes into it that actually delivers on those instinct or programming is in perfect harmony and perfect sync with it. So it's rare and it's really challenging to do, but we sort of have this situation where the lizard brain is really responsible for and drives us towards the short term. It avoids pain, it's territorial and tribal, and it's highly manipulatable, which is something we'll talk about in a moment. And where the human brain is this second part that is long-term, it embraces challenge, it's collaborative and empathetic and thoughtful. And then we have this machinery that executes on whichever one of those two things is winning the battle at the time. So individually, we're somewhat likely to act in a human manner. We're all smart individuals. We can all take stock of our situations. We all have the ability to step in and say, hey, this isn't, I want to react to this in a different way. En masse, though, we're social creatures. And so as we get more and more and more and more and more of us together in a society, in a government, in a company, in a country, our individual ability to opt into human mode gets sort of whittled away. And we generally end up in a situation where we get almost exactly what we incent. So en masse, we are short-term thinking. En masse, we are prone to mass hysteria. En masse, we are manipulatable. I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we face today. So the way we're looking at the construct of today's talk is looking at what we've spent so much time with ourselves and with our brain and with our emotions and trying to get ourselves into these higher states and this way of thinking. But we've really sort of not spent nearly as much time with the rest of that quote that I'd started out with. Paleolithic emotions, we've spent a lot of time trying to upgrade those. Medieval institutions, have we really spent that much time trying to upgrade those? And technology, the godlike technology that we're working with today, we've organized it to be the primacy where it should be in service of those other frameworks that we're creating. And so we'll talk about what we've done with ourselves and how we can leverage those learnings into upgrading our corporations, upgrading our governments, and then working that godlike technology in service of better outcomes, in service of more calculable human outcomes. So the lizard brain really with ourselves, lizard brain sets the instincts, the human brain tries to override them, and then our machinery executes whatever's left. Now, let's take a step back to our own lizard brains for a moment. The lizard brain only wants to eat and be safe. It's a very simple beast when it really comes down to it. It just wants to do exactly that, eat and be safe in a manner that it's been trying to do for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. If you show a lizard, or if you poke a lizard with a stick, it's gonna hiss and act big. If you show a human a picture of a terrorist attack, it's gonna push for tighter immigration rules and more government surveillance. If you show a lizard a group of strong lizards and a group of weak lizards, it's gonna go pick the strong group to destroy the weak. If you show a human a bunch of cool people drinking beer A or a loser by themselves drinking beer B, they're gonna go and drink beer A or buy beer A. It's sort of this idea of at our lowest level where we're very simple creatures and easily manipulatable. And historically, the way that we've been manipulated has been relatively straightforward. Propaganda, advertising, yellow journalism. It's been these sort of big bulk things that are trying to target you when you're in your most lizardly state of mind. But it's been en masse, and so it's been a country's at war. Let's target that whole country with anti-other country propaganda, or males between this age always want to drink beer, so let's target that entire segment with this advertisement over here. And really, where we've gotten to today is we've created these corporations, or we've created these platforms that allow us to exist in this virtual world where we're at complete ability to indulge our most lizardly fantasies all day with no frictions at all. Within the Googles and Facebooks and Amazons of the world, we can anonymously bully people. We can get social validation and social dopamine with likes in under 5 seconds. We can indulge in commerce. We never have to see any opposing views to what we already think and is comfortable to us. So we end up in these filter bubbles that really reinforce what we already believe and how we're thinking. And so we're essentially in this situation where we have these beautiful, well-designed UX playgrounds that just lull us into being in this simple lizard brain mode all the time. And that's when we're the most manipulatable. And so our attention, when we're in this manipulatable state, is then monetized on the back end using algorithms, using advertisements, using bots to a certain extent, using data collection. And the more and more manipulatable we are, and the more there is known about us, the more and more our attention's worth on the back end. And so that's effectively the business model for a massive swath of our existing businesses today. I mean, Zoom, what we're doing today, nobody's paying for this. So there's a business model on the back end of all of that. It's some are more explicit, some are less explicit, but essentially everything that's not being paid for, there's a business model of attention monetization on the back end. And why is that happening? Is it are corporations evil and want to subjugate and control the world? I think that it's essentially a situation where we're trying to apply this lizard brain, human brain construct to our corporations. And our corporations, really, their lizard brain is very simple, just like ours, except where ours says eat and be safe, corporation says maximize shareholder value. So whereas we react to stimulus with, if we're not in human brain mode, we're in lizard brain mode, fight, flight, aggressiveness, territoriality, and then our internal machinery executes and carries that out. Corporations are programmed in a similar way, where they look at stuff and say, hey, there's an opportunity to make one more dollar here. I'm programmed to be a shareholder value maximization machine, so I'm going to do that thing. And historically, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later, as we upgrade their machinery to be more and more automated and more efficient and more speedful and tighter linked in with that ultimate driving goal, then we lose any ability to opt out of that or make it more human. So as we create the corporate machinery that really simulates our own neural machinery inside, it becomes, it all gets executed seamlessly and in an extremely efficient fashion. But if we're executing it in an extremely efficient fashion towards this, lizard brain-like corporate goal of maximizing shareholder value, we end up with some really scary outcomes, like what we've created as our data paradigm right now. So what is a human brain outcome for a corporation? And we're just starting to plumb the depths of this, and people have been having conversations for a little while, but is it venture philanthropy? Is it monetizing externalities? Is this idea of a B corporation? Impact investing is a word that's thrown out a lot. Corporate social responsibility, stakeholder maximization, social IRR. All of these are various constructs that try and get or simulate or come up with some idea of what a corporate lizard brain could, or a corporate human brain could look like. But we've never really tried to actually create a calculable system around that. And we'll get into a little bit why we haven't done that so far. So the lizard brain is maximize profit, maximize share price. The human brain of corporations is, we don't really know. We've got a picture of Elon Musk over here because he's doing something different with his sphere of corporations. I don't know if there's an organizing principle around it. But it's an example of somebody who actually has a significant amount of resources, who appears to be doing something different than optimizing for pure profit. Whether that's right or wrong, this is just the start of these types of discussions. And then we have the machinery. So similar to our nerves and synapses, we have the machinery of business processes and technology that are really allowing these corporations to execute on what their lizard brain and human brain fight and decide. So if we can get a corporation to a state similar to ourselves when we're in Zen or flow, or those optimal mindsets with the mechanics underneath or executing on them, that's a really, really, really cool, powerful outcome. But we haven't even started to try yet in reality. So corporations can't override their lizard brains like humans do. And really, we've never even asked them to try that hard. So why are we in this world of shareholder value maximization? I like this quote: "The machine's even more blameless than an animal. It has no intention whatsoever but our own." We've imported, or we've inputted this instinct into our corporations, and essentially where we've gotten to is back in we've organized our corporations to make money for hundreds or thousands of years. But really, it started in sort of the 70s with Friedman, and really crystallizing and formalizing this concept of shareholder value maximization. And a bunch of managers said, hey, I don't want to run my own company anymore. I want to hire somebody else to run my company for me. So, but how am I going to find somebody who's going to do a good job? First, what does a good job mean? Is a good job for a company environmental responsibility? Is it reputation? Is it money? Is it customer satisfaction? Is it community well-being? Is it employee well-being? All of these things are potentially things that companies could be organized around doing for good. But these managers who didn't want to run their own company said, whoa. Trying to figure out if a manager is adding community well-being sounds like more work than just running the company itself. So they said, okay, what's the simplifying assumption? Well, if our customers aren't satisfied, they're not going to buy our products and we'll earn less money. If our employees aren't happy, they're going to leave, and then we're going to have to rehire and retrain, and we're going to earn less money. If our community is not happy with us, then we're going to have all sorts of challenges with our location. We're going to earn less money. If the environment, if we're not responsible stewards of the environment, the planet's going to explode, and then we won't earn less, or we'll earn less money as well. There's always these complicated time-based relationships back to this idea of money. And so where it became, okay, well, these are all potential proxies for good, it really, this simplification became that money equals good. So we're going to have a manager who we're going to pay more money when he earns more money for the corporation. That's calculable, it's simple, it's optimizable, and we can organize processes around it. So we came up with this simplification of money equals good. And this idea of organizing an entire scalable society and scalable global nature around it really has been sort of what's been with us ever since. But we're in a situation now where we've upgraded and optimized ourselves so far that we've forgotten that this was actually an equivalency. It was a simplifying assumption. Money doesn't actually equal good, but the pursuit of money theoretically leads to all of these other good outcomes, like satisfaction, like environmental stewardship. But there's two big breaks in this idea, and one is that the time frame does not add up at all. So just like corporations are similar to humans in that they're constantly looking for short-term hits and short-term fixes of dopamine or share price, the managers that are controlling them are looking for that same thing. So managers would make, customer satisfaction is a great example. They'd happily slash margins or slash consumer product quality and cost to create to bump up margins for a quarter, hit better numbers, see a better stock price increase, earn more of a bonus, and then have customer satisfaction come into play, a year, 2 years, 3 years later with no clawback mechanism. So this idea of timing of the actual incentivization award is completely out of whack. And as we get into even bigger things like environmental stewardship or these bigger picture ideas, that timing becomes farther and farther and farther away. So incentivizing people in the short term while expecting them to do long-term good is a break in this model. And the second and more important one is that money equaled good was an okay approximation when it was generally humans executing on those business plans and business processes underneath. If you had a middle manager that said, okay, well, we can earn $1 more over here, but it's going to cause all of this immeasurable and non-financially valued human suffering over here, like, okay, I know I'm supposed to maximize for shareholder value, but via some intangible process in my head, I know this is a bad idea or I'm not doing good, so I'm not going to do it. Machines don't feel that same way. If there is no calculable value assigned to this human suffering or customer dissatisfaction or anything like that, at that moment, they're going to make the decision to optimize or do the thing that earns them $1 over and over and over and over and over again. And then they're going to broadcast to all their other machine friends that are operating processes around the world in this connected landscape that we have to do the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. So we've created these optimizing machines that no longer have the human circuit breakers that sit in the middle of it. And so as we really kind of upgrade our corporate lizard execution machinery to this godlike technology, we've broken the equivalency of money equals good. And I think we've forgotten that it was just a simplifying assumption in the first place. So what is next? And what are we actually trying to do here? Because I think one of the big misses and one of the big pieces that we're looking at working into now is, okay, well, how do we create a calculable human goal or a calculable goal for lizard brain corporations? And that's a really cross-functional, multifaceted challenge. But it's something that's where the conversation needs to go. We're starting to create the technology now with wearables, biometrics, things that can actually have some sort of simulation of what a health or what well-being is on a calculable basis. What does a society look like where we've organized ourselves around healthiness or around some other metric that is starting to become calculable, because that is the key. That is not just money. And I think that's really where the crux of our discussion around corporations needs to move to next. And moving into, I love this, Godzilla isn't good or bad, he's just him. So the biggest picture that we haven't talked about yet even is the idea of the government, and the senior lizard that's a part of this. And the governments are really challenging because taking away all of the emotional baggage that comes with your political views, and what's happening in certain jurisdictions in the world right now, and even what's happening with Corona, which is a really interesting way to think about this framework. Governments are just collective well-being maximizing machines. In a perfect world, theoretically, we would have a great idea of what good is or what well-being is. We'd have corporations doing some things that create a certain amount of well-being. We'd have individuals do some things that create a certain amount of well-being. We'd have not-for-profits or whatever the equivalent would be in that world doing some things. And then we'd have government stepping in and sort of moving resources around with a key big picture oversight to optimize for the collective. There's certain situations where individually if we all sort of do our own thing to try and maximize our own good, then we break the collective good. And that happens, it's happening en masse with coronavirus now. But it happens all the time, and that's the reason we originally had governments and legislation and laws to sort of govern for the collective good. But we don't even have an idea of what the collective good is. So we've sort of simulated it roughly with governments with this idea of like, well, let's maximize GDP or trickle down economics, or okay, well, let's ensure that individual wealth is maximized because that's the best proxy we have for good so far. And that's in the Western world. It varies by country, but we don't have this idea of what actually is good. So should we be looking at life expectancy, individual wealth, connectivity? Hopefully it's not trying to maximize for votes for the party in power, but that's often what happens. Liberty, utility, health, jobs, GDP, there's all of these other potentially ideas that governments could be maximizing for, but they don't even have the luxury like corporations of saying like, yes, we're just trying to maximize for GDP, that's what we're going for. So we end up with this situation where governments don't have a lizard brain instinct, they don't have a human brain instinct, and the machinery they have to actually execute on those things is by and large a disaster. Committees, elections, legislations. I mean, and you have this situation where you tell people that money equals good all the way through their career, and then they get into government, and now they're expected to just say, no, I don't believe that. Money to me is bad. I'm all about the collective good. But you haven't given anybody any other frameworks to operate by. So expecting that complete flip and change from all that we've built our society around when people end up in elected positions of power is just unrealistic. We're not giving people the right tools to make different decisions. So we end up with this chaotic mess of government that I think we generally look at around the world of today. And I don't think anybody's satisfied with our current system of governance, but I don't think we have the frameworks to even judge what a satisfactory current system of governance looks like. So we end up with this stack effectively of individual lizards where we've spent a ton of time trying to understand how to upgrade ourselves, how to optimize ourselves, how to think in the right way, how to take ourselves into this higher thinking place and higher acting place. And we're still pretty shitty at it, to be perfectly honest, especially en masse. But we've spent the most time there, at least with understanding how we can potentially get into better situations. With taking a step up to the corporate lizards that are kind of using technology to keep us in a more lizard brain state on an individual level so that they can fulfill their own lizard brain goal of maximizing profit and maximizing shareholder value. We've never really put in a good solid effort of trying, and we haven't really had the tools, to be honest, of trying to give them a different set of instincts, a more human set of instincts that is a realistic goal. I mean, it's easy to say, well, corporations should do good, or it's even easy to say, well, we shouldn't be maximizing for stakeholder value. But what does that look like when we're trying to create corporations that are as efficient as machines? There needs to be zeros and ones in there. And the example that we always use, and I know it's cliche and some people on this call are probably going to shake their head, when you have a self-driving car, and you need to decide between running into the old lady or running into the baby. That was always an emotional, fraught, philosophical debate that was debated in classrooms or in ancient Greece. But a car needs to make that decision in that split second. And so there needs to be a framework around assigning value and goodness and all of those things. And Essentially, we need to port philosophy into a black and white programming language. And that's really hard to do, but we're not really even trying right now en masse at scale or having the conversations around it. And then at the top level of that is the government lizards, which really don't even have a lizard brain instinct, and let alone have a human brain instinct. Sort of trying to have a human brain mode without really having any of the ability to do it, and the discussion about what we're actually trying to do on there. So how can we leverage what we've learned about our own human brains to replace this infrastructure that we have? And that's really the hopeful, optimistic part of this speech, is that it's just us. It's just institutions that we've created all the way up the chain. There isn't actually a big, gigantic lizard that we need to create a super weapon against. There's not evil machines that are hell-bent on taking over the world. It's just all us. So as we get better at figuring out what makes us happy and what makes us better people and better humans, then it's a byproduct of that to import that into our corporations. And all of the framework and all of the fabric that we've built just starts operating on a different operating system. We don't need to replace the hardware. We don't need to replace our monitors. We don't need to replace a ton of this stuff. Some of it we do, but we just need to give it a different operating system and a different programming language. And we're getting to that point now as we can start to calculate and start to understand and start to really dig into what is happiness, what is good. And there's such a rich, interesting conversation to be had around that I feel like we're missing a lot of the time. So can we combine our human brains and our godlike technology to create better calculable proxies for good? Yes. Can we reorient our shareholder value maximization machines to maximize this better proxy of good? I'd love to be manipulated into being a better person by Facebook. That would be a super interesting, cool outcome. But in advance of that, I'd also love to have AI and those styles of technology operating on my behalf that knows me, knows my likes, knows what I'm trying to do, and then is directing me around or manipulating me through my digital world. And we're invested at Bicameral in several projects that are working on this and working towards this sort of integrity-filled human future where we're not at such a disadvantage by being at your meat speed instead of machine speed. Can we have money and equity and jobs and all of that stuff that we run our corporations on today when we have a better calculable proxy of good? Can we make money a byproduct instead of the actual thing? Can we create corporate lizards that manipulate us towards these better proxies of good? And can we restructure governments to just not have a lizard brain at all and just be that minimum structure of human brain at the top that organizes and sets in place the functions in the institutions that allow us to get to whatever this better proxy of good is? And yes, of course we can do all of these things. We can do some of them today with basic technology to protect ourselves and make sure we're operating in a better world. We can do some of them tomorrow with figuring out what this better calculable idea is. We can reorient our data paradigm to be more self-sovereign and start to understand a digital version of us already. I was doing a talk at Consensus this week on exactly that, of how do we control our data flow and harness it back to us so that we can essentially upload ourselves into the digital world and start using all these tools for our own benefit instead of for the benefit of the corporate lizards. But all of these things can be done. It's not a completely impossible dream to do because it's just humans all the way. It's just changing one little programming language and then watching it filter through all of this godlike technology that we've built. So I'm gonna leave it there. We've started to write a book on all this stuff because this is obviously an expansive topic and everything that we're doing fits into various veins of how we're looking at this whole thing. So please check out lizardandmachine.com. It's the first chapter, which is essentially this talk in written form is there. It's designed to be super collaborative. Writing it as a Git book, similar to World After Capital by Albert Wegner, if anybody knows that. And please send me an email, look me up on LinkedIn, follow me on Twitter. It's AlexM_Bicameral. We're always banging on about everything that's related to this. And this is really what the passion that drives us of leveraging what we have and just making it better. And it's within our power to do. And so let's all go and do it. And that is 1 minute before 11. So I got like 30 seconds for questions if there's anything.
So how do you relate the lizard machine to Spider-Man?
With great power, my friend. No, but I think it is a little bit this idea of, could we solve all of our problems with one really smart person? And that's somewhat of a terrifying thought. But if you can come up with the framework that allows a bunch of other people to be kind of manipulated into better outcomes, it's a little bit dystopian, but yeah, it can't be worse than what we have today. So there is this idea of we don't need to do that much. We just need to apply our efforts into the right specific area, and then everything else falls into place. But yeah, I hear you. Anyways, I don't want to run over time here, so please hit me up on anything. I'm always down to have a whiskey and chat about this stuff. Thanks again for everybody joining today. Thanks again for your time, and I'll stop my screen now. Thanks.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you very much.